Self-compassion and the capacity to find acceptance for the self is an integral aspect of our mental, emotional and spiritual well-being, and yet so many of us find it really difficult to integrate into our thinking. In fact, we're not even aware of how critical we are of ourselves at any given moment, because our internal critic, our egoic voice, has become automated. We don't even hear it half the time, and this is particularly prevalent for anybody who grew up in an environment that was particularly harsh, critical or judgmental, or indeed anybody who grew up in an environment where there was very high standards, where love and acceptance was conditional on achievement or on aesthetics, or indeed where any abuse, trauma or neglect occurred. Self-compassion is sometimes confused with self-indulgence or self-pity, and it is anything but. I mean, we have this warped idea that if we berate ourselves or if we deny what it is that we're actually feeling, that we won't feel it, or that we'll perform better, or that we'll improve. And yet when we criticize ourselves, when we berate ourselves, we're creating an internal attack, and consequently the body activates the stress response, and this results in adrenaline and cortisol and norepinephrine being released into the body, and this causes us to feel very unsettled. This causes us to feel very unhappy. We're in fight, flight or freeze. We're edgy. We can't settle. So it's basically counterproductive. We are pushing ourselves into our stress response unnecessarily, despite the fact that we were already in pain to begin with, as opposed to meeting ourselves with compassion, as opposed to helping ourselves to regulate and to self-soothe, and recognizing our common humanity, recognizing that we make mistakes, recognizing that everybody experiences pain, and being kind to ourselves in that pain, in that experience. Self-compassion moves us away from the shame that we sometimes experience when we're suffering, when we're in pain, or when we feel badly about ourselves. And it moves us into a place of acceptance and of loving kindness. And this extrapolates then to other areas of our lives. I mean, people sometimes assume that if they're self-compassionate, that they're going to think about themselves a lot, that they're not going to consider other people. Yet the reality is, the more critical we are with ourselves, the more critical we tend to be of other people. Whereas the more we recognise our own common humanity, the more likely we are to recognise others with compassion and with understanding and with benevolence. Self-compassion can really broaden our perspective. We tend to be quite narrow in the way that we view ourselves and that we view other people. And self-compassion recognises that there are numerous perspectives that can be taken at any given time. And we choose which one that we go with. We can go with the one that is harsh and critical and judgmental, or we can go with something that is a little bit kinder, a little bit more loving and a little bit more forgiving. And this isn't about shirking accountability or responsibility. If anything, self-compassion makes you more accountable, more aware, because you're not cloaked in shame. You are not trying to hide your mistakes. You're able to take ownership. You're able to acknowledge that you've made mistakes, and you're able to take appropriate action in order to move forward. As I said earlier, self-compassion can be extremely uncomfortable for anybody who has grown up in a punitive environment. However, neuroplasticity means that the more that we practice something, the more likely we are to create new pathways within the brain. So the more we practice self-compassion, the more aware we are of our thinking patterns, the more capable we are of catching ourselves when we're kicking our own ass, and the more we're able to come back to a more accepting position. Now, this isn't about loving yourself. This isn't about positive thinking. It's basically just giving yourself a little bit of leniency and recognizing that the things that happen in life sometimes just happen. I mean, it doesn't make you a bad person. It helps you separate your behaviors and your mistakes from who you are as a character, who you are as an individual, and things become a little less personal. So you can be accountable, you can be responsible without identifying with what it is that has occurred. Similarly, you can notice your emotional response to life with great kindness, with absolute acceptance. I mean, we don't dictate how we feel, yet we tend to judge ourselves for it. And the more we can recognize our emotions without becoming completely overwhelmed by them or without feeling that we have to run from them, the more likely we are to be able to move through them non-judgmentally. And again, this is a skill. It's something that requires practice. I mean, all of these spiritual concepts are practices, and they're called practices because it takes time to integrate them. However, that being said, if you don't start, you're never going to get there. So it's almost being compassionate with yourself on your self-compassion journey, recognizing that you're not always going to be able to do it, but catching yourself as quickly as you can and bringing yourself back into a place of loving kindness and of acceptance. The more mindfully we live, the more accepting we are of ourselves, the more compassionate we are with ourselves, the nicer our life is. I mean, ultimately, we have enough shit going on without kicking our own ass all the time, without assuming that we need to hammer ourselves. And it's just, as I said, recognizing that you deserve to be spoken nicely to and kindly to. This doesn't mean that you have to move into a highly egoic place. It's just about giving yourself a little bit of respect. And this will build your self-worth. This will change how you see yourself, and this will change your need to feel superior to others, because when you are being harsh on yourself, you tend to be continuously comparing yourself to other people, trying to judge whether you're superior or inferior, as opposed to treating everybody as just another soul that potentially has so much joy and so much love to give. If you would like to find out more about how you can become more self-compassionate, get in touch with me on the website. It is fundamentals.ie.